Welcome to the KOMO Sports End Zone podcast with KOMO Sports Director Niko Tamurian and Najee Moye.
Well, hey there, and welcome to the KOMO Sports End Zone. I'm Niko Tamurian, and that is not Najee Moye. Najee's away, but you've heard us mention on the show so often, super producer Taylor Corlew. Taylor making his guest co-host debut. What's up, buddy?
All is well. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
We will not hold it against you that you're a Rams fan.
Oh, man. I didn't think that would come up this
Like
this
10 seconds in. But listen, we know that you certainly are following just along with us. We know that the NFL is a little wacky this year. And I think that there's a lot of unique things to look at in this week 3 matchup. And I think that on paper, you look at it, the Seahawks are favored by 7.5. Yes. That's about what I would have guessed it to be. Yeah. But at the same time, you know, the Saints, yeah, they're 0-2, but those guys played the Niners tough last week. What's your initial impressions on this?
My initial impression is that this isn't really that potent of an offense that's coming into town.
Sure.
They're averaging 17 points right now. And Spencer Rattler is 0-8 as a starter. So
is that, I did not even know that. Is that a fact?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And just doing a lot of research, looking into this matchup. The Saints pass play, the percentage of plays where they utilize pass is 61.7%.
Okay.
Which is 11th in the NFL. And as far as rushing play percentage, Seattle ranks 8th in the NFL,
yeah,
48.25%. So going into it, they've 2 games in at least, they have clearly, defined who they are.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because I think a lot of coaches, when you talk to them, and certainly it's something we ask Mike McDonald about often, it's like, okay, week 2 going into week 3, have what we noticed become more of trends? Like, this is who the team is. Mm-hmm. Are they outliers because of a game? Like, for example, when you looked at the Seahawks in week 1, it's like, yeah, the numbers, especially offensive, weren't great, but you kind of knew that wasn't going to be like what we saw the whole year. Right. Like, you knew they were going to bounce back, and they certainly did that in a big way against Pittsburgh. The Saints, for that matter, though, it's one of those things where they're clearly dangerous. And, listen, I don't think they went into the offseason necessarily expecting, Derek Carr to be retiring when he did. Like, the injury kind of played out and went on. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, yeah, they drafted Tyler Shaw, and he hasn't played yet. But I don't think that they expected Rattler to be the guy, say, 6 months ago.
Right.
So it's to your point, they're still passing the ball a lot, despite who's under center. And I think a guy like Rattler, who's young, is probably only going to get better.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And like you said, they're definitely going to air it out. He had 46 pass attempts in week 1 against the Cardinals, and then 34 the following week against the Niners. So, they definitely have an identity at this point, even though it's 2 weeks in.
Well, and to your point, that's an important thing to point out, because the Seahawks defensive secondary is a little bit banged up. Yeah. We know Devin Witherspoon, Nick Emanwari, both probably not playing. Emanwari has a slightly better chance, but I don't think they push it because you've got the quick turnaround Sunday hosting the Saints, then Thursday at Arizona. And so, that's I think a key to look at in this game. Like, you're talking about these numbers, how much Rattler's throwing, that they've played some of these teams. Ironically, the first 3 opponents are all from the NFC West, the Cardinals, Niners, and now Hawks. But while they lost those games, they weren't exactly blowouts.
No,
and you know what I'm saying? Like, the Niners was close.
Yeah, both week 1 and week 2, they were 1-score games. So
yeah,
they're frisky, even though they're 0-2.
I like it.
So definitely, I don't think it's going to be an easy win, but I do expect the Seahawks to come out on top.
Yeah, and speaking of the Seahawks, you talk about that run identity. One of the things that we have to point out in here is Zach Charbonnet, as of this publishing Friday, not practice at all this week. He has a foot injury. He did not. While he was the more effective runner in week 1, he was not effective at all in week 2, 15 carries for just 10 yards. Right. That's really rough, right? Whereas K9, opposite trajectory, Kenneth Walker, 10 carries for 20 yards in week 1. Then he averaged almost 8 yards a carry in week 2 and was the guy. And so, it's clear that the Seahawks, like you mentioned, those running stats, like that was what we expected this identity to be. And in a game like this against the Saints, where they throw the ball as much as they do, this is where you can really bring that run game to life and like eat off the clock. And if you're successful, you can really suffocate that offense. Like, if they're going 3 and out or maybe 1 first down, and then you're eating, say, 6-7 minutes off the clock. If the run game is effective like it was in week 2 as opposed to week 1, that can be really the recipe for victory for the Seahawks in this one.
Absolutely. And do you think that Sam Darnold, I know he had 2 interceptions last week, but he also threw for two touchdowns, almost had 300 yards. It seemed like he caught a rhythm of sorts last week. Do you think he can continue to build on that against the Saints defense?
I think so. I think I'll talk X's and O's first. I think playing the Niners, who are clearly a different team this year than we saw last year, at least in the second half when they collapsed last year. I think that that was a tough defense. The Steelers, I'm not saying they're bad, obviously, but they're not the Niners.
Right.
And I think that in addition to that, you're still talking, it didn't matter who they played in week 1. Week 1 is week 1. Sam Darnold played 1 series in the preseason, and that's by design, right? Mm-hmm. And so essentially in 2025, or essentially in a Seahawks uniform, he has only played 1 series before that first game. So I think a lot of it is, getting your legs under you, getting a feel for everything, being on a new team with new players, even if they did it like rep after rep after rep after rep in training camp, it's still different being in the game. Absolutely. So to answer your question in that regard, I think that what we saw last week is much more indicative. No, I'm not saying Darnold's going to light up the NFL and be in the MVP conference. None of that. But I think what we saw last week was a little more indicative, more in rhythm. I would still like to see him react better under duress. We saw some, that's where one of the picks came from. He kind of just chucked it up in duress, pass deflected, intercepted. But I think by and large, he did a nice job and found his guys. Torrey Horton, first career catch is a touchdown. Things of that sort. And so I think not just with Darnold, but overall what we saw last week is much more indicative of what this team's going to be. And we've heard it since spring, like OTAs, minicamp, all this. I'm not going to use the exact word, but even Mike McDonald, every player, they say Sam has some about him, stuff about him.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And it's interesting that they all said the exact same quote. Mm-hmm. And because there's a lot of ways to say that. Oh, he's got some swag. He's got some stuff. He has some expletive, right? But the fact they all chose that word, I think tells you who Sam is, that he's a guy that can bounce back. Shoot, we've seen that in his whole career. Mm-hmm. Rough start with the Jets, back up with the Panthers and with the Niners, then emerges as this guy winning 14 games with the Vikings, gets a big contract with the Seahawks. This guy can clearly weather the storm, and that's the impression that I get when we talk to him at his press conference on Thursdays. He just knows, at least now, in this stage of his career, older, more mature, similar or akin to what we saw with Geno Smith, at this point in his career, can bounce back from those things a little bit better.
Absolutely. And let me segue off one of the things that you just mentioned. You mentioned he had a really bad pick when he was under duress last year.
Yeah.
And going into this game, I think one of the biggest challenges is going to be the offensive line, how they hold up against Carl Granderson.
Yeah, sure.
One of, I would say, the better defensive ends
mm-hmm.
in the league right now. He's currently tied for league leader in sacks right now at 3.5. And I think if he's able to get through, he can make it a long day for Sam Darnold.
Yeah, and so, right, because that was the thing about Darnold when they signed him, is that you have to keep him clean. You have to protect him. And I think that was a huge reason why they drafted Gray Zabel, the Seahawks did in the first round. So the offensive line has played better. Certainly you're talking about Abe Lucas, Charles Cross being healthy. Your bookends are good. Gray Zabel manning the guard spot. Jalen Sundell had a brief injury last week. Looks like he'll be all right, but he's been better at the center spot. So it's not like an all Pro Bowl line, although some of those guys could be Pro Bowlers. But you're right. I think that's the big matchup in this game. We talked about the Seahawks secondary against the Saints passing game. But if you look at it from the Seahawks side, not just with establishing the run, but keeping Darnold clean, keeping him upright, not just from a protecting your quarterback standpoint, which is obvious, but the idea that he is just so much more effective when he has a couple seconds to find his rhythm, as you said it. Perfect word for it. And listen, these are the things you have to look for in these matchups, because on paper, the Seahawks should win this game.
Absolutely.
There shouldn't be a doubt about it. It may be relatively close, but they should win this game.
Completely agree.
But when you say that, you have to understand the matchup you just pointed out. And that's what's big about this. You have to understand that there are a million-inch battles going on in the trenches, whatever it may be. And those could very well make the difference in this thing.
Absolutely. And even though Spoon is out, I am really confident still in the Seahawks secondary, their ability to, do what they do on a weekly basis. And especially against a receiving core in New Orleans that doesn't really have a clearly defined number one. I mean, on paper, it would probably be Chris Olave.
Oh, sure.
But as far as their passing attack, it's been really balanced so far this year. And nobody has had a crazy breakout game, I would say, as of yet. But I still would expect Seattle secondary to hold up very strong as they do every week.
Well, I think the point there is, okay, so you didn't have Spoon last week, and you didn't have even Worry last week, yet they held Aaron Rodgers, DK Metcalf, and company in check. Mm-hmm. The passing numbers for the Steelers were vastly inflated by that 65-yard screen pass to Jaylen Warren, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a great point to make. And can we talk about the revelation that Josh Jobe has been for this secondary? Like, this is a guy that was just kind of a project and has emerged himself, as a legitimate starter. That Spoon is Spoon, like Pro Bowler, one of the best you're going to find anywhere. But you don't take a huge hit when it's Jobe and Requoen out there as opposed to Jobe and Spoon or all three of them, because there are some of Mike McDonald sets that want to use three corners. The safety spots are going to be fine with Julian Love and obviously Kobe Bryant. Right. How about Kendrick making that pick in the end zone?
Absolutely. That
was a huge game changer. Like if the Steelers game was flipped on its head by that kickoff recovery by George Holani for the touchdown, which was a wild play. If that's like one with a bullet, how the Seahawks won, then 1B would have to be that pick by Kendrick in the end zone because it preserves the tie and Seahawks go down, add 3, and then the ensuing kickoffs where they score that touchdown. So, yeah, that's a great observation. And I think that's given how much the Saints want to throw the ball and how much of a test this is going to be, I think that's going to be an interesting part of this. You know what else I'm looking at in this, Taylor, is obviously offensive coordinator for the Seahawks, Clint Kubiak, came from New Orleans. Right. Listen, different coaching this year for the Saints. But listen, like Rattler was there last year. Obviously, the main characters like Kamara, you mentioned Olave, Rashid Shaheed's out there. Obviously, these are all guys that, while Clint is obviously doing his own game plan against the Saints defense, and maybe there's a bit of an advantage just because he knows those guys and went against them in training camp and practice all day, but he can also give a little bit of a wink and a nod to Mike McDonald and Aiden Dirty and be like, hey, watch this, or hey, they might. I'm sure it's nothing like that Mike and Aiden aren't already seeing on film,
right?
But like, there's got to be something there, right?
Yeah. And that's the interesting chess match kind of game within a game that also monitors, when going into these matchups. That's almost as interesting as what's taking place on the field.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things to do in the press box is to look down on the sidelines and like see what the body language or like what the coaches are doing. Like, okay, your attention is instinctively and automatically focusing on the guy who just had like the 30-yard catch. Right. But I want to see like what the coaches are doing. I want to see how they react. And usually 9 times out of 10, they're looking at the play card, getting ready for the next thing. Mm-hmm. But it's the game within the game. Yes. It's a really cool thing to see in that way. Speaking of being at Lumen Field, I can't wait to be back there Sunday. I'll be in the press box. We'll have live reports on KOMO News after the game. But there's something we got to talk about with them being at Lumen Field, right, Taylor?
What's that?
They've only won 3 of their last 10 home games.
Oh, wow.
They were 3-6 last year, and they lost the opener to the Niners. And, listen, so they were 3-6 at home in 2024, yet they went 10-7. Right. So do the math on it.
They left a lot on the table.
They were, what they did on the road was much better.
Yeah.
You think about, some of those road wins they got. And Leonard Williams spoke to this. He said it's kind of like an us against the world mentality. The crowd's going against you. It's loud. You're like in a different city that's unique, and almost like you band together. You're like you go on a vacation with your family, like you're keeping close together.
Absolutely.
Not because like you feel unsafe or something, but just because you don't know where you are.
Yeah.
But they said it's a point of emphasis to turn that around. And if there was a time to do it, I feel like it would be this game.
Absolutely. I think that the Seahawks, I think they're poised to go, to have a pretty fairly, not easy victory, but victory nonetheless, because Saints just, they just don't have much offensively. Defensively, they can get a little frisky.
Yeah,
like I said, but you know, it's still undecided if Chase Young is playing, the other defensive end.
Yeah, and he's a star in his own way.
Right. But I just don't think the Saints have enough. I've been reading a lot that, you know, they're kind of, I wouldn't say incentivized to lose, but I've seen their name come up in a lot of 2026 draft conversations.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think this really, obviously, it's okay. The coaches and players are always going to put their best foot forward. But when you understand, like, if you're a GM or an owner of the team, and we're not like insinuating, but like if you think about it, like they understand,
right?
You know, like it's just you know, it's a value thing. Whether, you know, so that's interesting to point out. So is this like a prediction coming up for you? Like, do you have a score in mind?
I would like to say something around like 24-17.
Okay. Yeah, I can
go
go with that. And by the way, you're kind of I'm saying something similar. I'm going to say 27-14 Seahawks.
Okay.
The over under in Vegas is 41. Like, do those guys like not know? Like, how do they know? You know what I'm saying? They always like are right there. You know, it's funny. Like, there's a lot of question marks. I always like to say, like, we do our best fantasy football advice, but it kind of goes along with, you know, if you go to Snoqualmie Casino and you do like the prop bet stuff, right? Like anytime touchdown score, that kind of thing. But I'm going to loop this in with like our best fantasy football advice. And it's a little difficult because Zach Charbonnet's status is up in the air. But here's my advice, and it can go to a prop bet. If Charbonnet is healthy, I think he scores a touchdown in this game.
Okay.
I think K9 has another pretty good game. Like, he'll get a lot of yards.
Okay.
I'm confident in that. I also think that Cooper Kupp is overdue for a touchdown. And I think that, like, I'm not saying some like 40-yarder, but I'm saying like
maybe a red zone touch.
Yeah, like a red. I think he gets that's exactly it. I think he gets a red zone touchdown this week. So if he's on your bench and you need a flex option, I think he could work this week.
Funny enough, and this is not the Rams bias coming out, but that was actually, I was going to say Cooper Kupp anytime touchdown as well. I completely agree. He caught a really nice rhythm, nearly had 100 yards receiving last game.
Yeah, he had a good game.
And yeah, like you said, I think he's definitely overdue for one.
Yeah, and I think the bigger the games that JSN has and the more of a threat that Torrey Horton becomes, it's just like when JSN broke out last year because of the attention that teams had to pay to DK Metcalf. In turn, I think Kupp's opportunities are going to open up. Listen, JSN is JSN, and like he's going to always be, you know, he's always going to have an attention. But now you've got Torrey Horton. Now you've got AJ Barner and Elijah Arroyo all getting attention. You even have to account for Robbie Utes out of the backfield. All of those things, you hit the theme of this. As Sam Darnold gets more in his rhythm, are going to be the reasons why Cooper Kupp continues to improve. And I'm calling it just like you are. And we hold no responsibility if you lose your fantasy matchup or your bet on this. But I think this is the week that Cooper Kupp gets a touchdown. What do you think about that? You're in it?
I completely agree. Yes. I would also maybe pencil in K9 for an anytime touchdown as well.
I hope so, because he's on my fantasy team. Now, what's interesting is I had to play in our KOMO league. I had to play against Najee last week, and I was so excited for K9 because I'm in my other league, but Najee had K9.
Oh,
and I lost by a mile. But yeah, I think that, you know, K9 is another guy. We talk about the reps that Darnold had in preseason. K9 was only played that one series as well.
Yeah.
You know, Charbonnet was getting a lot of reps in preseason, but on top of that, it was practice reps. K9 was coming back from a foot thing. He's had an injury history. It was like, well, let's not rush it. And you can even get the sense that Mike McDonald kind of lamented it a little bit. Like, he's like, well, you know, before the opener, he's like, well, kind of got to practice before he can play.
Right.
And that kind of set off some red lights. Like, whoa, what does that mean? Well, clearly he's been playing and all that stuff. And just like Darnold week 1, I think he's in that rhythm and in that routine that, okay, that's the K9 we know and love. And I think he's going to be pretty good the rest of the way, health permitting.
Keeping on with the episode's theme of rhythm, I mean, 105 yards, 8.1 yards a carry.
Yeah, man.
Steelers. That's, I mean, the running back position is much as about consistency and rhythm on a week-to-week basis as much as anything else. And as long as he's healthy, I absolutely seeing him having another monster game.
Yeah, and fantasy flyer for all our friends out there. If Charbonnet cannot get it going, George Halani, if you're in a league that gives return yards, George Halani gets a lot of those, but he's also going to get some carries if Charbonnet's out. Because you got to spell K9 at some point. Like, even if you give K9 20 carries, the way this team runs the ball, that's like 8 to 10 carries for George Halani, who you probably remember was electric in the preseason. It was the preseason, but he impressed everybody to the point where he got a roster spot, and somebody they drafted with high hopes, Damian Martinez, was relegated to the practice squad. So that's another thing to keep an eye on as well.
Absolutely.
Well, Taylor, how was your debut on the KOMO Sports End? Not your debut because, like, you've been on with us and you're always producing this behind the scenes
here and there.
Yeah, and we appreciate you being with us because obviously for people out there who don't understand, Taylor's the one who takes what we do every week and makes sure it actually is something you can listen to or watch, or both.
I mean, it's been a pleasure being a part of the End Zone team. I really enjoy it. It's one of the highlights of my week.
Well, I appreciate that.
Season. And I really appreciate you having me. I thought this was a blast. I loved this.
We'll have to do it more often. We're both saying Seahawks win.
Yes.
Najee and I will both be excited to tell you we were wrong last week when we said the Steelers would win, but I think we're both going to be right this week. What do you say?
Absolutely.
Hey, that was the KOMO Sports End Zone. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you all for checking in every week. Go Hawks.